If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. Did I say it was free? It's totally free. You don't have to pay anything to get started. There are creation tools, and you can edit and trim the end. You can record. There's intro music that you can use. It has so many really cool features that I really needed as I was starting to podcast. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So go download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM and get started. Go ahead, download, get started. Let your voice be heard.
I laid in bed looking at the ceiling, trying to remember what city I was in. I knew I was on business travel, but I didn't know if I was in Cleveland or Chicago. What was I supposed to be doing that morning? I mean, I literally had to lay there for 10 minutes before I realized what I was supposed to be doing that day. I mean, work was so intense that sometimes I was just overwhelmed. I was working my dream job at a New York advertising agency, traveling, staying in nice hotels, paying for meals. I had a cell phone before it was popular. I mean, cell phones were still crazy expensive, but I had one. And I had a laptop. Yet I was completely overwhelmed and worn out all the time. The way I was traveling was not at all glamorous like I thought it would be. When my father passed away, they called me after 2 weeks to ask if I was coming back. Or rather, they told me that if I didn't come back, I would be fired. So I went back. Actually, his passing opened a spiritual awareness that made fast food advertising like what I was doing look utterly ridiculous, like a waste of my time. I felt that way shortly after I got the job, but I was trying so hard to do well at it, and I wanted to succeed, and someone had referred me for the job, and I'm like, this is supposed to be what success looks like. It didn't feel like success to me. I had no energy for any kind of socializing. Whenever I did have a free weekend, I had to zone out just to recuperate. You know, if I could just muster up the energy to take my laundry across the street to be washed, that was like huge. At the time, there was no phrase like grind culture, which we have now. My guest today is going to talk about grind culture. I remember reading a book called The Reinvention of Work because it was by Matthew Fox, or is by Matthew Fox. I knew that there had to be some other way of working, and I am so glad that work has shifted, and there's so many different ways of working that are considered valid. Well, I guess it depends on what circles you travel in, but they're valid in my circles. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my guest today, and I want to thank you so very much for tuning in to the Center Her Power podcast. I love coming to be with you and sharing information. And if you like the podcast, can you subscribe, like, and do all the things that people do when they like podcasts? I switched to a new service, a new podcast host, and so I'm hoping that works out. I don't know. I may switch back. I'm not sure. I got to see how it works out. So you all let me know. You can send me an email at Sanaa@CenterHerPower, or you can find me on Instagram at CenterHerPower. And I'm going to tell you about our guest, and then we'll get into the show. Heather Archer is an Afro-Indigenous activist and wellness coach with a vision and mission to create patterns of thriving in her personal life as well as in the communities that she serves. She is a certified life coach with specialties in sound healing, Reiki yoga, and hypnotherapy. With an educational background from Smith College and New York University and over 15 years of experience with teaching, training and curriculum development, she weaves academic and organizational background with her work as a healer and wellness coach to create transformational learning experiences for you. Here's my interview with Heather Archer. And I am so excited to dive into her new book. And it's really, to me, touching on some of the key issues that I have had with work and purpose, and then this whole notion of the grind. So, grind
Mm-hmm.
culture. Heather Archer, can you tell us a little bit about grind culture? What exactly is it? Oh, actually, you know what I wanted to do? I have something that I took
Hmm.
from your book, one of the exercises, and so I wanted to see if you can
Okay.
introduce yourself in that way. So, in the book, you talked about
Okay.
understanding who you are and how you connect to your ancestors. I'm very much connected to my ancestors, and so I wondered if you could introduce yourself and give us your name, who you are the daughter of, and who you are descended from.
Ah, I love that. Thank you for grounding us in that way. My name is Heather. I am the daughter of Pamela and Marcus, and originally from Chicago. And I come from an Afro-Indigenous lineage, so that includes Lakota Sioux, Native American, and the Bubby people of Equatorial Guinea, and the Tikar tribe, and the Fulani in Cameroon.
Wonderful, wonderful. I haven't done the tribes yet. I've done the genetic DNA testing, and I've not done the tribe. My cousin actually did the African ancestry test to find out which tribe our maternal lineage is from. And when she did the test, they found that the DNA group that we're from, the haplogroup that we're from, is not found on the continent, the subcontinent of Africa. Actually, we're
Wow.
from Madagascar, which is off the southern coast of Africa. Yeah, so we're Malagasy, and that's where I have the connection to Lemuria, and that's where all of this, the remembrance of Lemuria
Oh.
and the connection to the earth and song and
Mm.
sound, vibration, how that all comes together for me. And I wonder if you could tell us how sound and nature come together for you.
Mm. Well, thank you, first of all, for sharing that. Yeah, I just feel like it just gives me so much more insight into who you are. Um, so for me, sound has just been a fact of life for my family on both sides. I have I have some classically trained musicians on both sides of my family, and they grew up in the church, the Christian church, and I never grew up religious, so I was kind of a weirdo in my family. It was like most of my family grew up in Chicago. I grew up in California. I wasn't raised religiously at all, but my family back in Chicago definitely went to church, and so a lot of the music is tied to the Christian church. And I've always loved gospel music. I've never like connected as much to the religion part, but I love the music part. And because I guess I never connected to Christianity, I always kind of was like, oh well, my family's really talented. My family, they do the sound thing. They're musicians. They're the creative ones. And I never saw that in myself. And I remember a few years ago, my cousin was like, no, no, it's in you too. And I remember being like, okay, like I just didn't believe him. And so sound healing, particularly with the crystal singing bowls, it was just as soon as I played it the first time, it was over. It was done. It was a new journey for me. And I just had to see sound and music in a different way. So I grew up always loving music. Used to want to be a music producer, but I never thought that I would be the creator of the music. I always thought I'd be arranging it in the background and stuff. So um yeah, I would say that my sound healing journey has definitely consisted of me coming back home to myself.
My family was very musical too, and in my generation, my brother is a classically trained musician. My stepfather was a gospel musician, and I do love the music. And at one point, I was very religious too. So I see in your work that there is a lot of spirituality. You mentioned that your family was Christian and religious, and now you're helping people in a way that I would consider very much spiritual. How do you see the
Mm-hmm.
correlation? Do you? I really think that families sometimes that we've come here for a particular reason, like our lineage has a particular
Mm-hmm.
purpose. What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for asking these questions. Yeah, I think that my sound healing practice is definitely, and my general career path currently is very much aligned with ancestral remembering. Because a lot of the things I was called to do by my ancestors and guides, I was very resistant to it. I was very resistant to getting my first set of singing bowls. I kept getting the nudge for months, and I was just like, why am I thinking about these singing bowls? Like that's for, I had all the reasons as to why I shouldn't, and a lot of that had to do with representation. Like, I don't see people like me playing them. I could be spending my money other places. I could be spending my time all those reasons that you don't do the thing. But it was the reclamation of, learning about my ancestral roots, really claiming a lot of my ancestry. I think I spent a lot of time feeling like the lone wolf in my family, or like the black sheep. And so I didn't see myself as a part. And that a lot of that had to do with just like how I was particularly raised. And yeah, I think even with the spirituality piece, because um, I very much, I actually was given a Bible about a year, maybe going on 2 years
Your
ago
first
now.
Bible was 2 years ago?
And
Wow.
yes, that was given yes, yeah, I never owned a Bible before. But this Bible was from my great grandmother, and my uncle was in, when I did reconnect with my father's side of the family. My uncle said he was instructed to give this Bible to the oldest living woman in our lineage, and that's me. And I remember looking at this Bible like, okay, that's great. Like, I was happy to get the mementos, like the pictures, the obituaries, the letters, but I was like, I don't know what to do with this Bible, you know? And I think just recently, especially as I started learning more about the lineage of hoodoo and root work, and how, a lot of times our spirituality, during this transatlantic slave trade, was like stripped from us in a lot of ways, and we had to hide it within Christianity. And so looking at the Bible from a different lens, not as a form of indoctrination, but as a form of perseverance, that was a game changer. So I do study the Bible now, interestingly enough, and it's connected to my spirituality for sure. But yeah, my family and my spiritual practice is just, the closer I've gotten to my family lineage, the closer I've gotten to a lot of this soul work.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing so in depthly. Um, I see a link, a correlation between a passage that Khalil Gibran wrote about work, and that, and I'm going to paraphrase it, that if we cannot work from love, from the love of our soul, then we'll make a bitter bread. And so it's better just to sit at the
Mm,
gates and pay alms, is what he's saying. I'll have to read it and share it in the
mm,
in the when I do the editing. But that work can, for me, I've been really processing this whole notion that work is also a spiritual calling. And
yes.
as a spiritual calling, it can also be, you know, a grind. And can you talk to us a little bit about how you came to connect with this notion of grind culture? I know that you were in your book. You talked about how you were working in a summer camp, and I actually worked at a summer camp one summer. And you're, yeah,
Oh
yeah, yeah,
wow.
in West Virginia, in the mountains. And you're so right. You spend all of these days, and you're creating these experiences for young people, and there really is very little downtime to like reflect. I know for me, I always need time to regenerate
Mm-hmm.
after I've been around a large group of people, and especially after I've been around children. As much as I may enjoy them,
Mm-hmm.
they do require a lot, and they want your best. And if you can't come with your best,
Mm-hmm.
then they're really going to be hurt by that, and the whole group can be hurt, even if you're So I wonder if you could talk to me. I think I'm going to change this question. So if you could talk to me about what drew you to work with children in this therapeutic way.
Mm-hmm. Mm. It just was so natural for me. I really got a lot out of education, self education growing up. So I really loved the intrinsic desire to learn. School, depending on the subject, I liked it or I didn't. But one thing I always remembered was just that when I remembered a good teacher. To your point around like how children like really want your best, and just really thinking about those standout adults in the education system that they just came with something extra. They came with that dose of love, like going back to that Khalil Gibran quote you mentioned, and just how much they helped me, how much their care and presence helped me. It was something I wanted to do, to give back. And I knew I was going to be an educator when I was about 16 years old. Really weird story. I used to go and hang out in Barnes and Noble a lot, and um, I don't know. One day I passed by the reference section of Barnes and Noble, and I was homeschooling at the time, so I was getting ready to graduate from high school. So I was in a very self study mode, and in this reference section there was a book which had all of the test scores of California schools, and so I grew up in Southern California, and so I was like, all right, let me look at my test scores from all the schools I went to, just because. And I just remember feeling so cheated because I looked at all the schools I went to and we were like in the 50th percentile time and time again. And then I was like, well, let me look at the schools that are just really like right down the road, but they just happen to be in another zip code, with a little bit more money. And they were all in the 90th percentile. And we're talking about a few miles away from each other. And I was like, so literally just because I didn't have, I wasn't in the same zip code, I didn't get the same level of public education. Like I just felt so robbed. And I was like, no, this isn't right. And so I just remember just wanting to provide like equitable education experiences. So that fire of like that injustice is kind of what has always, not always, but and up until very recently, that's been kind of the thing that has fueled me of just like providing another alternative to people who look like me, who are just as curious as anyone else.
I find, having worked around people who are youth workers, I guess, I mean, there are people like you who kind of came up. I don't know if you came up through a youth program and then became a youth leader, and
Mm-hmm.
then, yeah, okay, so
Yep.
you were kind of cultivated, and so you have a sense of, um what is the word? There's a word where there's like adultism, youthism, and you feel a sense that you've been empowered to advocate
Mm-hmm. Yep.
for youth, and particularly for yourself. And I didn't come up that way. I didn't come to youth work from that way, but I think that there's a similar thread with people that I have met who are really the strongest advocates for youth. Those who feel that they, in some way, did not get what they were entitled to as a young person.
Mm-hmm.
How does that drive to um, advocate for yourself. How do you see that playing out in your work now?
Mm. Oh, that's the whole grind culture detox process has been like self advocacy, like knowing that, I can pour all of my energy into my detriment, into my work. And what is it going to really do for me at the end of the day? Like, am I really working on behalf of justice if I feel like, I'm going to break because I got to get this event together, or I have to get this experience together? I had to really go in and look at the way I was raised and look at the norms that I accepted, and like really look at breaking patterns, generational patterns a lot of times. And there's a self advocacy in that. There's that knowing that you deserve better, and also knowing that nobody's going to give it to you. I mean, we are working towards a world in which it becomes easier for each generation. But at the same time, a lot of it is about cultivating your voice and saying, actually, no, I deserve this, and yeah, that's definitely been, I haven't thought of it that way, Sanaa, but like, yeah, that's still very much something that, that self advocacy is very much something that's rooted in the work I do today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so what I want to do is kind of shift a little bit. And I want to go to some of the
Hmm.
myths that you mentioned in your book. And I just want to call it out and then I
Hmm.
want you to kind of talk a little bit about it, which would kind of give us some more
Hmm.
understanding of grind culture. Okay, one of the myths
Yes,
you talked
yes.
about is that you are less valuable than someone from the dominant culture.
Mm, yes. So, this system has been set up. The system that we currently are working and living in has been set up to benefit a certain type of person. And a lot of times that is, what we'd call like cisgendered, heterosexual white men, that they eat first kind of thing. That's kind of how our society has been set up. And if you think about it, it's because it was created a lot of by the imaginations of cisgendered heterosexual white men, and so there's a that makes sense, right? You're going to create the vision of for yourself. And so with that, because we haven't analyzed that, and we haven't done our healing work, once again, the ancestral healing work, it happens on both sides. It happens for the oppressor and the oppressed, and also knowing that, I've been oppressed, but I've also been the oppressor, so doing that necessary work. But if you don't have the time to do that healing work, you're just going to keep perpetuating that cycle of favoring a certain population in our society. And that has created a lot of falsehoods. It's created a lot of perfectionism, like feeling like we have to appear a certain way in the workplace in particular, or in our schools or organizations. And if our name doesn't sound a certain way, if we don't look a certain way, if our hair doesn't look I mean, it's endless, and our society benefits from that. There's a capitalistic point of like, if I feel incomplete and if I feel like I have to constantly look outside of myself for self-worth, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to buy that, I'm going to be a consumer. And so, yeah, that's a falsehood that has, definitely said, like, if you don't fit this particular box, then you got to work, what we've heard it, right? Twice as hard. That's just a common thing that a lot of people of African ancestry living in the US have heard, is you got to work twice as hard. And that's just a fact of life.
Right.
And I think, the work now is like, is that a fact of life? Like, why is that a fact of life? Let's
You know,
start
I,
there,
I think I think I want some new
instead of,
facts. I'm going to
yeah,
establish some new
exactly.
facts.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of, that's definitely a big part of the myth busting. Is like, is this a fact, and whose fact is this, and why is this really starting with why, and seeing where that takes
You know,
you.
I'd so relate to that because I am a recovering grinder. Well, I don't know if I would say it like that. I mean, I think I guess I don't know how if I would say it that way, but I worked in corporate America. I worked in advertising
Mm-hmm.
and I was really trying to achieve career success through working in a system that was created by the dominant culture, which required
Mm-hmm.
working, working, working. I remember when I was working in New York at an advertising agency, I was working with a black agency, but we constantly had to validate ourselves to the white agency and to the
Yep.
client, who was a big fast food maker. And there were times
Mm-hmm.
when I was working so much, I would get up for, at like 4 o'clock in the morning to get a 7 a.m. flight, get off the
Mm-hmm.
plane, go to the meeting, get the rental car, go to the meeting, meet about what we're going to talk about to the franchisees, and then go to the hotel. And maybe by the time I got to the hotel, maybe it was 9 p.m. So I have been going
Mm-hmm.
the entire day. And then the next day, I have to get up to be at the meeting at 9 a.m. and
Mm-hmm.
then run to the airport to catch the plane to come back home. It was
Mm-hmm.
crazy. And then I was like, wait a minute, if why am I working this way? If I'm gonna work these crazy hours, then I really need to be saving the world. Not promoting something that's not even healthy for my own community. So
Mm-hmm.
so I had to change, but the change was very difficult and uncomfortable to achieve. So I want to actually go into another myth, but I wanted to see if you could speak to the process. I know in your book, The Grind Culture Detox, you have some exercises that people can engage in where they can reflect on what's happening in their lives in relationship to work. I also wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about your personal experience with this
Mm-hmm.
transition, because if you've been bred, and like you say in your book, we've been acculturated to be this way. I mean, the schools, you didn't say this part, but the schools are actually designed to create workers. Yeah,
Yep.
the schools are not created to create self starters, independent thinkers, those who analyze and process ideas and thoughts and the culture. We're
Mm-hmm.
taught to accept what is and to live, to go out, to get a job. How did you make the
Mm-hmm.
shift? I know it's probably a long story, but
Oof.
give us the highlights.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, first of all, speaking to what you mentioned around the traveling and working, you described days that I definitely had. Um, Now, the flip side of it is the work I was doing. I did feel like I was saving the world. So we had the mission, it was like mission aligned. And so I was like, so I just threw myself into it, and there were days where I was like so in it. I was so into it, so excited. And there's going to be times where it's going to be a fast moving day. It's going to be action packed. But I think the issue becomes if that's the constant, if that's the constant pace, that becomes more difficult. But I think for me, I'll be honest, it all changed when I got pregnant. To your point around being like I would call myself a recovering perfectionist, and just feeling like I always had to be on. I always had to be 10 steps ahead. And I was bred that way to navigate a lot of these white dominated institutions. So going to predominantly white institutions for college, there was a certain way I had to move and navigate. In a lot of ways, it supported me in the workforce, but it wasn't necessarily healthy for my well being. And it particularly wasn't healthy for creating a family. If I'm putting everything into my work, that's cool. But then what if, until it's not, until you're a caregiver? And so, really understanding my humanity outside of my work, that was the first step for me. And I talk about it in the Grind Culture Detox, but there was this moment of like, wow, I've never, and this is my own ableism coming out. I never had the experience of feeling like my body or like my body was a liability, like my ability to work was a liability. I never had that. I never, after I started educating myself and learning more about my internalized ableism and stuff, I realized that it was just me. A lot of people have that experience, but being pregnant and all of a sudden me needing to take time off to care for my child, like maternity leave was a fight, and I was like, whoa, why am I over here fighting for maternity leave? And then started doing research and was like, oh, I don't need to get maternity leave according to the US government. That's not required. I don't, so it's really up to my job to decide. And luckily I was able to fight for maternity leave, but I'm like, dang, I gotta fight for my maternity leave. Like, I wasn't expecting to do all of this. And yeah, I think, when I had my baby, I was able to get 2.5 months off, but that still didn't feel like enough time, and I was like doing research into like places like Canada where they get like 9 months. I'm like, really? Like, or places where there's paternity leave too. And so I was already in a position of like, dang, like I really do wish I could have a little bit more downtime, but bills got to get paid. I got promoted at the same time that I came back to work. So I got a promotion where I was doing a lot more, taking on a lot of responsibility, and also a new mom, and just really feeling the pressures of like, when I was at work and working overtime and taking calls outside of regular work hours and stuff, I was feeling guilty. It was being done out of a sense of guilt of like, because I was also taking breaks to breastfeed and that sort of stuff where I had to pick up my son early. So a lot of that's when I started to see my humanity differently, like outside of just me being a producer, but also being a caretaker, raising a human life. That's when things really shifted for me. And I started to see my existence a lot differently, because I was like, oh, this is very conditional. This is, it's all good until I got to have set some boundaries around work and that sort of stuff. So that was kind of my journey. And working at the particular summer camp I was at, we were doing healing work. We had the sound healing, we had the yoga, we were teaching African history. All the stuff on paper was right. But what wasn't right was we didn't have the space to rest. We didn't have the space to slow down. And so, a critical question I ask myself with any work I do now, specifically in the name of healing, is, is it healing work if people don't feel safe resting? And I would say, I don't think so. I don't think that that's healing work. We should have permission to pause. We're not all going to go at the same pace, and we get to tap out. It's okay to tap out sometimes. That's a part of the ebbs and flows of life. And I learned that in a very hard way, worked my body really hard that summer. I knew something needed to change when I was like going 16 hours without eating, because my stress response, when I'm in a lot of stress, my appetite goes. But it's like, I can't be doing that when I'm breastfeeding, like that's not really a thing. I got to make sure my body is providing nutrients. And so, yeah, it was like, oh, wow, I can go 16 hours without eating, running myself ragged, not getting a lot of sleep, and breastfeeding. And nobody's going to tell me to slow down. It's got to be me. If I don't set this boundary, who will? Nobody else will. And it was that moment of like, Heather, this is you. This is a you thing. Yes, we live in this society, and yet if you want to thrive, you gotta start setting some boundaries. And that's very
Yes.
difficult.
So I want to go. You talked about some of the signs that you may be in a grind culture, and so I wanted to go on to page 17 of your book, and I'm going to read a
Mm-hmm.
couple of them, and those who are listening might be able to kind of judge for themselves whether or not
Mm-hmm.
they see this in themselves. So one, you said, how often do you skip mealtime at work, which is something that you talked about. How often do you feel
Mm-hmm.
guilty when you aren't working? How
Mm-hmm.
often do you check work related emails after your workday is officially over? Or if you're self employed, the workday never ends. That's something that I
Mm-hmm.
really need to work on. Um, how often do you feel like your work is in competition with your family? And how
Mm-hmm.
often do you miss out on family events or activities? So those are just a few of the. I know
Mhm.
you have a list of, I think, about 15 or 20 ways that you can know whether or not this actually applies to you. Like if you're, like the
Mhm.
boundaries between work and your life and your well-being are have been crossed. How did you come up with those
Mhm.
questions?
Um, I'm very, I'm very much connected to my routines. I'm somebody who is a creature of habit in a lot of ways. Um, and when I was at the height of grind culture, I was very much in my calendar. So everything, every minute was accounted for. Everything I had to do was on my calendar. Everything's color coded and stuff. And so I started, because I am this creature of habit and routine, and I lived by my calendar so much, I started to see like, wow, if I don't put my livelihood in my calendar, it won't get done. If I don't make not just the things I have to do visible on my calendar, but also the processing time that I need, the rest time that I need. If I don't start doing that, like that just seemed like a really attainable way for me to start setting some boundaries, is to like really look, okay, how are you living your life? And I was able to see that by looking at my calendar. And yeah, I think a lot of this came from my own healing journey around grind culture. I've been very much inspired by the nap ministry and the work of Trisha Hersey around naming grind culture. And I think for me, the way I've propelled the work is like, okay, how do we name grind culture in the workplace? And what are some small, subtle shifts that we can make within our day? Once we name grind culture, what's in our locus of control? And so, the way we set up our day, that's in our locus of control. Not all that, sometimes we're going to have busier days than others. However, it's like if we go back to the choices that we make, it's a way to start shifting the grip that grind culture has on us. And so when I ask people to do that assessment, I always preface it by saying, this is not for you to get an A+ on, or to be the well-being ambassador. Like, no, this is, we're all going to answer these questions. Like, we're all going to look at this assessment after and be like, dang, nobody's going to really be absolved from that. But it is a way of naming it, of like, it's just making the elephant in the room be heard, I think, was why and how I developed those questions, to make it not just a common sense fact of life, because when you see it on paper and it's like out of your head, you're like, oh, this is interesting. Why am I organizing my life
Mhm.
this way?
And so I see that you do workshops. Can you tell us how can someone work with you?
Hmm. Well, there's a couple of ways. So I do one-on-one coaching where I take people through a grind culture detox coaching experience. It's an 8-week experience. And the goals of that is to assess someone's relationship with grind culture, set goals, really introduce them to different wellness practices that they can incorporate in their workday. If we wait to heal after work, the healing a lot of times won't necessarily happen, or not in the ways in which we need it to happen. And so it's like, how do we bring the healing practice into our work so that we're in a state of flow instead of the grind? So that's one way. Another way is, buying the book. The book has some really cool practices in it to just, if you're like curious about grind culture and you're like, I want to assess my relationship with it, you can also do a self study through reading the book. I also have a group coaching subscription program. So it's a monthly subscription where we read the book together. We'll do activities related together. We focus a lot on energy healing. How do we manipulate energy in the workplace in a way so that we're not feeling drained and that sort of stuff? It's just a way to have an accountability community, like knowing other people are going through this process, because you can feel a little isolated sometimes doing this
Wow. Now,
on your own.
how can
So,
you can you give us
yeah.
an example of how we can manipulate energy in the workplace?
Oh, yes. Okay. So, one thing is, we the people that we work with, sometimes we get to choose who we work with, sometimes we don't, so with that you encounter all kinds, some people you're going to work well with together. Some people might be considered what we might call like an energy vampire, and that might be done on that might be a purposeful thing, or it just might be a trauma response that they're doing. And so a lot of ways you can tell is through boundaries. If people accept your boundaries or not. If your boundaries are reasonable, like, all right, I'm off at 5, I'm legally contracted to work 8 hours a day, but you're constantly seeing that that boundaries being tested constantly by one particular colleague or one particular manager, that might be a sign of, okay, there's an energetic manipulation happening, and so we might need to work on that. And so then you might need to do one really easy technique is, if you're working with a challenging person in the workplace, making sure you do an energy, you do a bubble of protection. Just take a moment right before the meeting starts, um, go into stillness, envision a bubble of energetic protection, knowing that, you have created your own sacred space before this meeting happens, reclaiming your energy. Um, and so that, just mentally, mentally preparing your mind for that interaction, and coming at it from a place of power as opposed to disempowerment. And then after the meeting, saging, especially if you work from home, all that energy just stays in your home, like making sure you're playing a sound bowl. Like, it could take 1 minute. You could listen to a whole hour sound healing, or you could play a sound singing bowl for like 1 minute before your next meeting, right? Clear the space. So really seeing it from, sometimes, like, from a spiritual warrior, wellness warrior. Like, sometimes there is a way of a peaceful warrior with the work of the grind culture detox, because not everybody's going to understand it or support it. um and accepting that, and also still like remaining in your power, remaining in your sovereignty, while living and working in this world.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. So, if people want to work with you, they can do individual coaching, group coaching. You'll take them through the book.
Hmm.
They can walk through the book. And
Hmm.
how else? I know that you did a retreat not long ago, or
Yeah, so I do retreats from time to time. I haven't done my own, like, hosted my own retreat. That's in the future, but I do, like, there's actually one coming up in October. I'll send the information so that if anybody kind of wants to attend. But I'll be doing a sound healing and breath work retreat, with a black yogi. Her name's She Rocks Yoga. She does some amazing yoga and breath work. So she has a whole setup in Joshua Tree, California. It'll be a 4-day experience. So I'll be presenting at that. And also, I have a podcast too. So, like, I'll interview different people who are going through the grind culture detox process in their own ways to get strategies. Also, if you go on my website at thrivingwithheather.com, I also have some free toolkits, if you want to, kind of start the process, but maybe you're not ready to do the one-on-one coaching or the group coaching. There are some toolkit downloads, which I have a thriving toolkit that you can download, which gives you a book recommendation list for your grind culture detox process, and different ways to start organizing your calendar in a humane way. So yeah, I'm really working on making sure my services reach folks where they're at, in different points of the journey, because we're all at different points of the journey.
well, Heather Archer, thank you so much for joining me on Center Her Power podcast. You share such great information, and it's a great book. You all, you be sure and get it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for holding this space, and it was really great connecting with you, and thank you so much for your thoughtful
You're very
questions.
welcome. Hey, everybody. We're talking about this quote in the interview, and I wanted to just step aside and put this little quote in here so that you have it. This is from The Prophet. The name of the book is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. Work is love made visible. And if you cannot work with love, but only with distaste, it is better that you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms from those who work with joy. Meaning, look at and honor those who work with joy. For if you bake bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but half man's hunger. And if you grudge the crushing of the grapes, your grudge distills a poison in the wine. And if you sing, though as angels, and love not the singing, you muffle man's ears to the voices of the day and the voices of the night.